Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping straight into something pretty wild. Cryonics.
Yeah.
The idea of basically hitting pause on death. Freezing someone, hoping future tech can, well, bring them back.
It's a really powerful idea, isn't it? A kind of rebellion against, mortality itself. And Robert Edinger was a huge figure in getting this whole thing going.
Edinger, right. The physics teacher with a sci-fi leaning.
That's him. He really pushed this idea, wrote about it, and then actually founded the Cryonics Institute back in 1976. His whole thing was future science won't just cure stuff, it might even reverse aging in these frozen people.
Okay, so practically speaking, how does it work? I mean, our sources sketch out a process that sounds intense.
It is.
Life Science mentioned draining the blood, replacing it with essentially antifreeze.
Uh-huh. A cryoprotective agent, technically, to try and prevent ice damage.
Right, cryoprotectant. And then the body's stored in liquid nitrogen.
Yeah.
Super, super cold.
Extremely cold, yes. And you see this at places like Edinger's own institute near Detroit, started 76, cost about $28,000 back then.
Wow. And his family were early cases.
Yeah, his mother first, then later his two wives, and eventually Edinger himself. Then you've got Alcor out in Arizona. Bigger scale, over 200 people stored now, I think.
But much pricier, right? Like $200,000.
Nice. Around that, yeah. It's a significant investment.
So the core belief driving all this is that somehow this process preserves
What?
the essential person, their brain, memories.
Exactly. That the information that constitutes you is preserved well enough for future technology to, well, reboot it, essentially. And that's really what we want to dig into today.
Yeah.
It's not just the how of freezing, it's can it actually work scientifically? And then the deeper stuff, the philosophy.
Yeah.
What does this mean for who we are, for personal identity?
Right. Because getting cold is one thing, but it's not that simple, is it? One of the articles, Mechanisms of Cryoinjury, really flags the danger zone.
Uh-huh. It's not the final super cold temperature that's the main problem. It's that intermediate range, maybe Metagirl 15 down to Netigo 60 Celsius. That's where things get tricky, both cooling down and warming up, if that ever happens.
And the big villain is ice crystals.
Absolutely. That's the core physical challenge. As you cool, ice usually starts forming outside the cells first.
Okay.
And water naturally wants to move from inside the cell to join that ice outside. It's about energy levels, basically. So water leaves the cell.
And what happens then depends on how fast you cool.
Exactly. That figure 1 in the article shows it well. Cool too fast, and the water inside doesn't have time to get out. It freezes inside the cell.
Which sounds bad, like tiny little daggers inside the cell.
Pretty much it can rupture membranes, cause all sorts of damage. Muldrew and McGann talked about this osmotic rupture idea, the stress of water movement tearing things apart.
So, okay, slow down the cooling then.
Well, you'd think so, but slow cooling has its own demons. Caro and Webb pointed out it can strip away essential bound water from proteins and structures inside the cell. Plus, you get these solution effects.
Dilution effects, what's that?
So as ice forms outside the cell, the liquid water left behind gets super concentrated with salts and other solutes.
Ah.
This creates a really harsh hyperosmotic environment that stresses the cell. Mazur's work highlighted this. And then if you thaw, water rushes back in and the cell can swell and burst.
So it's like damned if you cool fast, damned if you cool slow.
It's an incredibly fine line. And then there's the sheer size problem someone brought up on Reddit.
Right, the ELI5 thread. Freezing tiny things like sperm or eggs is one thing.
Uh-huh. Relatively easy to cool those quickly and evenly.
But a whole human body, you just can't get the core cold fast enough with liquid nitrogen, can you?
Exactly. The outside cools, but the inside lags behind. Spending too long in that dangerous intermediate temperature zone, ice forms uncontrollably deep inside. That's a massive obstacle for whole body preservation.
And looking at the history, well, it doesn't inspire a ton of confidence, does it? That Big Think article was pretty grim.
It really was. Documented cases of mismanagement, equipment failures, bodies just left to decay.
That New Jersey vault example,
Mm-hmm.
uninsulated pipes, partial thawing, refreezing, ending up with a plug of fluids. It sounds horrific.
It is. And the descriptions of the damage when those bodies were eventually thawed, skin cracked, organs literally severed, spinal cord snapped, it's brutal. It shows the immense physical forces involved when freezing and thawing aren't perfectly controlled, which, for a large object, they currently can't be.
So yeah, massive hurdles for freezing whole people right now. But the science isn't all spall, is it? Our sources mention cryopreservation is making strides in medicine for organs and tissues.
Absolutely. That's where a lot of the more grounded progress is happening. Not trying to preserve a whole person for centuries, but specific tissues for transplantation or research.
Like what kind of techniques?
Well, for shorter term, there's static cold storage SCS, which is basically just keeping things cold, like organs on ice. Okay.
And machine perfusion, or MP. That involves pumping a special solution through the organ to deliver oxygen and remove waste. It generally works better than just static cold, prevents some damage.
But that's short term. What about longer storage? Vitrification came up a lot.
Right, vitrification is kind of the holy grail for long-term preservation. The goal is to cool so fast, or with enough cryoprotectants, that the water solidifies like glass without forming any ice crystals.
Like glass, no crystals at all.
That's the aim. It usually needs really low temperatures, like -80 or even down to -130 Celsius, and high concentrations of those cryoprotective agents, the CPAs.
Which can be toxic, right?
They can be, yeah. That's the trade-off. Though interestingly, one article mentioned you can vitrify tiny things like sperm sometimes with extremely fast cooling, even without CPAs.
And then warming them back up is another challenge, devitrification.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you warm up too slowly, ice crystals can form during the warming process. That's devitrification. Plus, just the temperature change itself causes stress. So how do you warm something quickly and evenly? Nanowarming sounds cool.
It's a really clever idea. You infuse the tissue with tiny magnetic nanoparticles.
Okay.
Then you use radio frequency fields, which heats up those nanoparticles very rapidly and crucially uniformly throughout the tissue. It helps avoid that damaging ice formation during rewarming.
There was also mention of controlling when ice forms. Controlled ice nucleation.
Yeah, that's another strategy. Instead of trying to avoid ice completely like in vitrification, you try to manage precisely where and when the first ice crystals form. The hope is this might improve cell survival and maybe let you use lower, less toxic concentrations of CPAs.
And looking to nature. The wood frog. That came up a couple of
Why,
times.
yes, the wood frog. Incredible example. It can literally freeze solid in winter heart stops, no breathing, and then thaw out and hop away in spring.
How does it do that?
It uses natural cryoprotectants, mostly glucose and urea, basically flooding its cells and tissues with them to limit ice damage and protect cell structures. There's definitely stuff we can learn from strategies like that.
Of course, the artificial cryoprotectants we use, like DMSO and glycerol, they help, but they're tricky.
Very tricky. They reduce ice, yes, but as we said, they can be toxic themselves, and you have to add and remove them incredibly carefully to avoid shocking the cells with sudden changes in water concentration, osmotic stress. It's a delicate balancing act.
So despite the whole body challenges, we are getting good at freezing some things. Sperm, embryos, that's pretty standard now.
Yeah. Sperm, eggs, embryos, cryopreservation is routine in fertility medicine. Huge success there.
And corneal tissue, though maybe not perfectly routine yet.
Right. Corneal preservation is possible, but one source noted there are still issues preventing its widespread, routine use everywhere. And research is pushing into preserving neurons, complex engineered tissues. Small-scale successes are definitely happening.
It really shows the potential for medicine, doesn't it?
It does. It proves the principle can work for biological materials. The enormous challenge remains scaling that up safely and effectively to something the size and complexity of human brain, let alone a whole body.
Okay, let's shift perspective a bit. What does the public think about all this? That survey of U.S. internet users had some interesting findings.
Yeah, it did. Most people, about 3/4, have at least heard of cryopreservation.
But they maybe don't have the details right, like costs and numbers?
Exactly. People tended to underestimate the cost and the number of past cases, but overestimate how many companies actually offer it.
Interest seems, well, higher than I might have guessed. 20% interested in signing up, another 21% looked into it.
Uh-huh. But only 6% had actually decided to do it. So there's curiosity, definitely, but maybe not commitment for most.
What motivates that interest? The survey linked it to wanting a longer life, seeing the future.
Yeah, those attitudes correlated with positive feelings. Interestingly, just being afraid of death didn't seem to be a strong predictor.
And negative views might be less common than people assume. Like, few thought it should be illegal, but many thought other people felt that way.
Right, there's a perception gap, perhaps. Pessimism about success is pretty common, though 42% doubted it would work, with the average guess for revival being, 82 years out?
Any differences between groups?
Men tended to have more positive views than women, according to the survey.
And if you think it'll work, you're more likely to be interested and want to live longer.
That makes sense. Yeah, there was a correlation there. And one less interesting point on perception. Direct mistrust of the providers wasn't super high, but a lot of people, about a third, thought that most people believe it's a scam or ripoff.
So maybe skepticism about the feasibility rather than outright distrust.
That seems to be the implication, yeah. Is it
Yeah.
actually possible, and is it worth the money?
Which brings us crashing into some really profound philosophical territory. Personal identity. If you freeze someone and bring them back,
That philosophical inquiry paper tackled this head on.
it really did. It asked the fundamental question, can your identity actually survive this process, especially given the potential disruption to the brain? It mentioned Locke's view, right? Identity is about consciousness, memory.
Uh-huh. John Locke argued that as long as you have that continuous stream of consciousness and memory, you're the same person, even if the body changes. But cryonics potentially disrupts that memory chain significantly.
And Reed had an objection.
Thomas Reed argued that memory kind of presupposes identity. You need to be a self first to have memories. It's a bit circular for Locke, maybe.
The paper also touched on parfit, bundle theory.
Yeah, Derek Parfus suggested there isn't one single, enduring self, just a bundle of interconnected psychological states. And Bernard Williams complicated it further, saying identity involves more than just memory or physical continuity. It's about our whole complex web of experiences and characteristics.
And then there was this idea, emergent illusionism. What's that about?
That's a fascinating perspective. It suggests that our feeling of having a continuous, stable I is actually an illusion created by the complex workings of our brain.
An illusion.
An emergent property, yeah. Kind of like Nietzsche's idea that the self is an interpretation we impose on the constant flux of becoming. It feels real and continuous, but maybe it's more like a story the brain tells itself based on incoming data and stored patterns.
Wow. Okay, so if the self is this constructed, maybe even illusory thing, what does that mean for cryonics?
It throws a huge wrench in the works, doesn't it? Even if you could physically revive a body perfectly, if the process scrambled the memories, altered the brain's fine structure, what exactly comes back? Is it the same person if the basis for that emergent illusion, that psychological continuity, is broken?
It challenges the whole idea that just preserving the physical structure is enough.
Exactly. If identity isn't just the hardware, but the software and the running processes. Freezing might be like hitting delete.
Heavy stuff. And then there are the more practical, down-to-earth problems, business, logistics.
Oh, absolutely. We mentioned the cost. Alcor's $200,000 isn't small change. That immediately raises questions about access. And then how do these companies stay afloat for potentially hundreds, even thousands of years? It's a huge financial question mark.
That timeship project mentioned in one article, this huge cryonics mecca.
Yeah, it shows the scale of the ambition, the massive long-term investment required, but it also underscores the uncertainty.
Because it all hinges on future tech that just doesn't exist yet.
Completely. That's unique to cryonics. Even if they achieve perfect preservation now, they are entirely dependent on future generations having both the technology and, frankly, the inclination to revive them. There's no guarantee future society will want to or be able to.
Plus, the legal side seems murky, too. It's not universally accepted.
Not at all. NAD.com touched on how it fits awkwardly between medical procedure and, well, funeral arrangements. The legal status varies, creating ethical gray areas. Who is responsible for these individuals long term? What are their rights if revived?
So many unanswered questions on top of the science.
It just adds layers of complexity to an already mind-boggling challenge.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. The dream of cheating death with cryonics is compelling, no doubt.
Definitely.
But the science, especially for whole bodies, faces enormous hurdles with freezing, damage, and thawing. Successes are real, but mostly at the small-scale cells. Some tissues, mainly for current medical use.
Right.
Public interest is there. People are curious, but it seems mixed with a lot of skepticism about whether it can actually work and the cost.
And understandable skepticism, given the challenges.
And philosophically, wow, it forces you to ask fundamental questions about what it even means to be the same person over time, especially through such a radical process.
Precisely. So, whole body cryonics today, it's still very much in the realm of speculation, banking heavily on future breakthroughs we can't predict.
Which leaves us, and you, with a final thought to chew on. Given everything we've talked about, the massive scientific challenges, the costs, the ethical questions, the reliance on an unknown future, where should we, as a society, focus our resources when we think about longer, healthier lives?
Yeah, is it moonshots like cryonics? Or should the focus be more on tackling aging, preventing disease, improving the quality of life we know we have now?
There are different paths, different philosophies. We're thinking about the implications of each. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.